Hi, hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. Today let's talk about a Gayathri Chakravarti Spivak's essay, Can the Subaltern Speak? Can the Subaltern Speak? First published in 1983, then revised in 1988. Gayathri Chakravarti Spivak, born in 1942. First of all, let's understand the term subaltern and its difference from the term Dalit. The term subaltern originates from Antonio Gramsci and refers to any group that is socially, politically, and geographically outside the dominant power structures. In a post-colonial theory, especially in the works of Gayathri Spivak, the subaltern is someone whose voice is not only unheard but also systematically erased by structures of colonialism, patriarchy, caste, or class. A Dalit is a specific identity in the Indian caste hierarchy, those historically classified as untouchables and placed outside the four-tier Varna system. While all Dalits can be seen as subalterns, not all subalterns are Dalits. Subalternity is a broader category that includes marginalized tribal people, landless laborers, poor women, and others across the globe. Dalits have a strong tradition of autobiography, literature, and political mobilization, whereas subaltern speech, by definition, is often unacknowledged or silenced. While the subaltern concept critiques epistemic violence and the calls for ethical representation, Dalit politics demand structural justice, reservation, and visibility. So, in short, Dalits are a specific socio-political identity rooted in the caste system, especially in India, while the term subaltern is a theoretical category used to understand a global marginalization and its erasures. Now just understand the two terms. Origin of the term subaltern is by Antonio Gramsci in a Europe post-colonial theory. Example, Gayathri Chakravarti Spivak. The term Dalit is an Indian caste system term. Dalit means oppressed in Sanskrit. Now the scope of the term. Scope means the area covered by the terms. The term subaltern is used in a broader way, includes anyone outside a hegemonic power. For example, tribals, women, peasants, etc. Whereas the term Dalit is very specific. It is used in India only. It's a caste oppressed groups outside the Hindu Varna system. Now the geographical focus of the terms. First of all, subaltern is global, especially colonized countries. The term Dalit is used especially in South Asia, primarily in India. Now the types of categories. Subaltern is a theoretical and a positional idea, whereas Dalit is social, political, and a cultural identity term. Now, whether about they can speak or not. The subaltern is often theorized as unable to speak, especially Spivak says that they are not able to speak. Then the term Dalit is assertively speaking through literature, activism, and legal rights. Now the basis of marginalization in subalternism, it is colonialism, patriarchy, epistemic erasure. Then in a Dalit, it is caste-based untouchability, Brahminical hierarchy. Then the famous thinkers under subaltern study is Gayathri Chakravarti Spivak, Ranjit Guha, Partha Chatterjee. and a Dalit race B.R. Ambedkar, Kancha Ilayya, Om Prakash Valmiki. The primary struggle in Subaltern is to find out a voice, recognition, ethical representation. Whereas in a Dalit, it is for justice, dignity, rights, education, and a reservation. Now, the literary presence of both of the categories and subaltern is often theorized about rather than self-represented. So they never represent themselves. They are not able to speak. Whereas Dalit, we have a strong corpus of autobiographies, poetry, essays written by Dalits themselves. Gayathri Chakrabarti Spivak's essay, Can the Subaltern Speak, was first published in 1983 in a Marxism and the Interpretation of Culture, then revised in 1988. The field the essay belongs to is post-colonial theory, deconstruction, feminist philosophy. The purpose of the essay is to question the politics of a representation and a voice for the oppressed, especially in a post-colonial context. Now the background and the context. Post-colonial crisis of representation. She is inspired by the gap between Western theoretical frameworks and the actual voices of colonized people. She responds to both the Western intellectual arrogance and post-colonial elite nationalism. Engagement with the Subaltern Studies Collective in India. The Subaltern Studies group, including Ranjit Guha, Partha Chatterjee, etc., aimed to write history from below. Spivak appreciates this mission, but critiques them for replacing elitist erasure of gender and voice. Western theoretical influence responds critically to Michael Foucault and Gilles Deleuze, who claim that oppressed people can speak for themselves. Spivak points out the blind spots in Western leftist theory regarding imperialism, patriarchy, and a language. The central thesis in the work is the subaltern cannot speak. When she says so, this does not mean they are mute or passive. It means that within dominant structures of power like a colonial, patriarchal, epistemic, etc., the voice is either erased, misread, or co-opted. Even their acts are interpreted through the lens of elite or colonial narratives. Now the major themes expressed in the work. First of all, subalternity. Subalternity is a Gramscian concept, refers to those excluded from hegemonic power structures. For Spivak, subaltern is a relational positional term. A person is not subaltern at all times. The subalternity is context dependent. Subaltern women face double erasure from colonialism and patriarchy. The next theme, representation and representation. Spivak uses Marx's distinction. Vertretung, that is political representation, and a Darstellung, that is symbolic or aesthetic representation. Intellectuals often conflate these, speaking for the subaltern while simultaneously constructing them through language. The next theme, epistemic violence, is a term coined to describe how colonialism and dominant knowledge systems erase, distort, or invalidate subaltern knowledge. For example, British colonial authorities criminalizing sati without understanding the cultural context and without listening to women's perspectives. The next theme is critique of Western intellectual advocacy. Western theories like Foucault and Deleuze bypass the issue of who gets to speak and who is heard. Their focus on power from below masks how those at the margins are still constructed and framed by those in power. Now the next theme is patriarchy and gender. The female subaltern is the most muted figure. Colonialism and indigenous patriarchy both deny her speech. Feminist critique is insufficient if it fails to address race, class, caste, and imperial legacies. Now let's analyze the structure of the essay. First of all, there is a critique of intellectuals like Foucault and Deleuze. Both thinkers disregard institutional meditation in the expression of marginal voices. Spivak shows how their romanticization of the oppressed ironically silences real voices. Next, we have a discussion of Karl Marx's theory of representation. The writer draws on Karl Marx's 80th Brumaire to distinguish Vertretung, that is representing politically, example a member of parliament, and a Darstellung, that is depicting or portraying symbolically. Spivak warns that speaking about the subaltern is not the same as letting them speak. Next in the essay we have a critique of subaltern studies. While the subaltern studies group from India attempts to rewrite history from below, it too excludes the subaltern woman. She is either romanticized, overlooked, or textualized through male perspectives. Next, we have a case study that is about sati and suicide. Spivak discusses Bhuvaneshwari Baduri, a woman who committed suicide in 1926. Her act was meant as a political statement, not a ritual sati. Yet, family and public interpretation ignored her motives, reducing her to a mythic role. This example proves that even when the subaltern acts, her voice is overwritten. Now let's analyze the key concepts. Strategic essentialism is a later concept that means temporary use of simplified group identity for political mobilization, but dangerous if permanent. This is called strategic essentialism. The next term is possessionality. Possessionality means the ethical responsibility to locate oneself in systems of power when speaking about others. The next term is silence is not equal to muteness. Subaltern silence is produced by structures of power, not a lack of thought or expression. Now let's analyze the criticisms of the essay. The first criticism about Spivak's essay is that it is overly abstract language. She is criticized for being dense and jargon-heavy, making it inaccessible to non-academic readers. The second criticism is about agency denial. Some argue Spivak goes too far in denying the possibility of agency or resistance. The third criticism, that is feminist and grassroots activism rebutted. Activists argue that subalterns do speak in local struggles, oral traditions, protests, etc., but are ignored by academic discourse. Now let's talk about the contemporary relevance of Spivak's essay. Post-colonial and Dalit studies. Spivak's framework helps interrogate how caste and gender intersect with a historical silencing in India. Then, intersectional feminism. The book is influential in showing how race, class, caste, and gender work together to marginalize. The AI, technology, and data colonialism. Current debates on how digital platforms erase or misrepresent marginalized voices echo Spivak's insights on epistemic violence. Global human rights advocacy urges caution in speaking for oppressed groups without accountability or local engagement. Now let's discuss the main quotes from the essay. First one, the subaltern cannot speak. This is Spivak's most famous line, highlighting that true subaltern voices are not heard or recognized within dominant systems of power. The structures of knowledge and representation are so skewed that even when the subaltern speaks, they are filtered, misrepresented, or silenced entirely. The next quote, there is no space from which the sexed subaltern subject can speak. Spivak adds a gender dimension to her argument, emphasizing that women in subaltern positions face even more radical erosion. Between colonial and patriarchal frameworks, their voices are doubly lost. Neither colonizers nor native patriarchy listen to them. Now the next quote. The subaltern is not just of lower rank. It is the difference between subject and object of oppression. Subalternity is not merely about being poor or oppressed, but about being completely outside the systems that allow recognition or agency. The subaltern is not only spoken for, but is constructed as silent, making them objects of others' ideologies rather than subjects with agency. Now the next quote. Speaking for the subaltern is always already caught in the structure of representation. Any attempt to speak for the subaltern is mediated through dominant intellectual and cultural codes. This means even well-meaning interventions risk reproducing the silencing they hope to counter. Now the next quote. What must the elite do to watch out for the counting construction of the subaltern? Spivak turns the question back on intellectuals, asking how the work may unintentionally preserve hierarchies. Instead of rescuing or romanticizing the subaltern, elite should examine how their own positions reinforce marginalization. Now the next quote. Between patriarchy and imperialism, subject constitution and object formation, the figure of the woman disappears. The subaltern woman is not only unheard, but it disappears from discourse altogether. She is not just silenced, but erased. Her body and life reduced to symbols or tropes. Now the next quote. The subaltern cannot speak means that even when she makes an effort to the contrary, her speech is not heard as meaningful. It is not the absence of voice, but the absence of recognition that defines the subaltern condition. The issue is epistemic. That is, her speech is unreadable within dominant knowledge system. Now the next quote. There is an impulse among the oppressed to speak out, but that impulse is framed and contained. The desire for expression among oppressed is real and powerful, However, structures of power dictate how that expression is filtered, contained, or neutralized. Now the next quote. It is not just that we can't know the subaltern's voice. We can't even know if it is a voice. This radical formulation suggests that dominant epistemologies can't even recognize subaltern speech as legitimate discourse. This critique underlies the depth of marginalization. It is not just social or political, but a cognitive and a linguistic. Now the next quote. The ideological construction of gender keeps the male dominant. Spivak critiques how both a colonial and indigenous cultures construct gender to uphold patriarchy. Even in anti-colonial narratives, the female subject remains a secondary or absent presence. Now the next quote. When we come to the concomitant problems of the consciousness of the subaltern, it is almost impossible to gauge. Subaltern consciousness cannot be accessed through traditional theoretical models. The intellectual's challenge is to remain aware of this gap rather than trying to fill it presumptively. Now the next quote. The task is to learn from below. Rather than speak for the subaltern, Spivak urges intellectuals to create ethical listening spaces. It requires unlearning dominant modes of thought and allowing space for other epistemologies to emerge. Now the next quote. White men saving brown women from brown men. It is a sharp critique of colonial feminism that masked imperial agendas as humanitarianism. Spivak exposes the hypocrisy and violence embedded in this trope, which ignored the voices of the women being saved. Here she refers to the sati system. Now the next quote. The possibility of action for the subaltern is always located in the structure of impossible contradictions. Subaltern actions are often distorted, misread, or completely absorbed by hegemonic narratives. These contradictions make a genuine, unmediated subaltern agency nearly impossible within dominant systems. Now the last quote. We must insist that the female intellectual, as intellectual, must learn to stop answering for the subaltern woman. Spivak here critiques both a Western and elite Indian feminist who claim to speak on behalf of the subaltern woman. She calls for a more nuanced, patient, and a non-co-opting engagement with the silenced voices.